Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us at this second discussion panel under the title of Achieving Cyber Defense Through Public and Private Sectors or Partnership. I see some new faces today for those who couldn't make it yesterday. So we started the first discussion panel yesterday talking about, or we started from where control system used to be proprietary to automation vendors and the evolution all the way to a microprocessor-based automation system. We talked about the challenges, we talked about the organizational change, the requirement, roles and responsibilities, and we talked about some specific technical techniques that can be applied as well, not only to the field of information technology, but as well to the field of industrial control systems. And we talked about network segmentation, and we talked about patch management. Today we are going to have a different type of discussion. It's not going to be that technical. It's going to be a little bit different. So we are going to talk more about the collaboration and the relationships between different stakeholders. I will start by introducing my very special guest today. I will start from the right, Dr. Salah Al-Sharhan, Vice President, Planning and Development at Gulf University for Science and Technology. Dr. Salah, professional area of focus are e-management, e-learning, and e-training. So he's the e-professor and PMO. Dr. Salah Al-Sharhan served as a member in different levels, as a member and the program chair, track chair, and organizer in many regional and international scientific conferences and associations related to education and e-learning and e-services, e-systems, innovation and information technology worldwide. Also, I'm glad to introduce my next guest, Mr. Samuel Linares, Director of Industrial Cybersecurity Center, who gave a very, very interesting presentation. Thank you very much, Samuel. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science from University of the Oviedo, and is a university specialist in data protection in the Colegio of University in Madrid. He's the founder and director of Industrial Cybersecurity Center. He has more than 20 years of experience in security, system integration, multinational and multicultural projects management experience. He's also a main promoter of industrial cybersecurity concept in the Spanish-speaking world. He holds various certifications, GICSP, CRISC. I'm not going to go through all of them, so many certifications. So you can go to kx.org, you can check. Also, I'm also glad and honored to introduce my third special guest, Joe Langill. Thank you so much, Joe, for conducting the workshop yesterday. It was a full house. You cannot imagine how it got filled, and we apologize for those who couldn't find a seat. It got filled so fast in the morning. He's the ICS cybersecurity specialist at Infrastructure Defense Security Services, with over 30 years of experience developing industrial control system solution. He started from all the way from pneumatic systems all the way to what we call now the cloud-based services. He served also as a co-author and a technical editor for several books on industrial security. He's also a founder and of the globally recognized website scadahacker.com. Welcome, gentlemen, and we hope today to share the different experiences we have about this topic, which is going to be, or what I hope is going to be a little bit subjective more than objective. We want to hear different opinion, and we are glad to have people from different regions and different cultures. So I'll start with you, Dr. Salah. Let's talk a little bit about, or let's start with the relationship between the public and private sectors. What type of challenges we have, what type of responsibility each has. So if you can start with that point.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ali, and thanks for the invitation. I'm privileged to be here amongst you. And this is very important issue, the relationship between the public and the private. And as we know, public sector always, they have their own challenges and the biggest one is like, the bureaucratic system that they have. So what we're trying to do through the public-private relationship is to introduce all the expertise and the experience that owned by the private sector to the public sector. That's a very important aspect. However, we are facing global challenges and local challenges. When we talk about global challenges here, that means most of the countries in the world, they are suffering from this. Number one, we can identify the governance and the management between the two parties, the private and the public. Who owns the authority? Who owns the governance? Who designed the governance system? That's a very important aspect. Also, a global challenge is always the communication style and the planning style between the two parties. That's very important. Lack of communication is a real challenge in any relationship between the private and the public sector. And also, in addition to that, we are looking for the resources provided by the private sector to the public sector, which is like, needed in order to build the capacity, in order to have like, a good knowledge transfer system. Lacking to these like, systems of knowledge transfer is another challenge.
20 seconds.
If we shift ourselves to local, I think the main challenge that we are facing here in Kuwait is the lack of a proper infrastructure of the relationship between the public and the private. And I mean here, it's the governance system between the public and the private systems.
Thank you. Samuel?
Thank you. I think that it's a question of probably the biggest challenge is to align the objectives. Probably the private sector has usually different objectives than the public side. From the private sector, usually what we want to do is to increase the benefits, increase the profits, so decrease the costs and increase the incomes, okay? And you know that at the end, all of the private companies, or most of the private companies, are looking for the approaches, projects of minimizing the costs and making efforts on optimizing the process in the way that the benefits and the business go better. In the other side, the public sector, the governments and regulators and so on, theoretically, the main objective is to look for the best for the society, and that includes offering best services, offer resilience in the services, and ensuring that the availability and the maximum quality of the services that us as citizens will be getting. So sometimes these different objectives can't be aligned because, as I was discussing in the presentation, sometimes the government start to moving and to push the private sector in a way that the private sector probably is not quite comfortable with that, especially launching regulations, requirements, and a lot of things. So I think that one of the big challenges is to communication, to communicate in an adequate and proper form between the two sides, and of course to agree on a common object, or all, try to align our efforts.
Thank you. Joe?
Thank you. It's kind of good that at least I have strong opinions, so this will be a little fun today. So I do agree with what Sam said in taking objectives as a primary component. But one thing that I see, and again, I'll speak primarily from experience with the United States public sector, because the problem really does vary as you travel to different regions across the world. But the one thing that I believe is one of the greatest challenges that we've seen in the United States and other very developed organizations, both private and public, is the lack of a true partnership. Partnership really means that both parties are equal and that you work to the mutual benefit of one another. What I see unfortunately happening with the desire to create regulations to try to solve problems is that people start to introduce this lack of trust. And that trust in turn results in the inability to really share information freely between the public and the private sectors. So what happens is that the private sector fears retribution from the public sector if they tell them too much, and the public sector really doesn't know how to provide a true bi-directional flow of information. Because what we're starting to see, which I hope would change, is information sharing is starting to turn more and more into information gathering and collection rather than information distribution. And hopefully some of the topics that we'll discuss a little bit later will allow me to enumerate that more. But again, if we don't allow free flow of information in both directions, I think we're going to have problems.
Thank you, Joe. Samuel, I will start with you for the next question, because I noticed in your presentation you were talking about or highlighting on the importance of transparency. So let's talk about transparency, and what are the challenges where the challenges that we are facing in sharing the information between the government and the public and the private sectors?
Okay, I agree with you in that I think that the benefits on this should be aligned or must be aligned in reality. And the big challenge here is that we need to get a common point of probably a starting point when we develop and build a way that we can go together from the public, from the private, to get the information sharing. In fact, for me, honestly, and I already stated in the presentation, information sharing in the reality for me, it's almost, no, I will not say impossible, but very, very difficult at these stages of maturity, at the level of maturity that most of the companies and the governments have. Because the first thing that we need to share information is to know what information I want to share. And that's not an easy question, because you know that we manage a lot of information from different sources, and we have to identify, classify the information, and know what kind of information, what amount of information we want to share. But the other important question is what information I want to get, to gather, and to consume. Because we can get access to a lot of information, but most of the information could be not interesting for us or directly interesting for us. So we need to identify also what information we want to consume. And the third question, also very important, is to analyze how the information I'm sharing and the information I'm consuming could be gathered together and analyzed, correlating all the information and making something like a common reference or a common site or something like a reference site where others can, again, identify information that they can share, information they can consume. And of course, for me, it's really, really difficult because we need to do all of these tasks, not easy tasks, real hard and strong projects. And of course, we need to develop also the formal way of communication about what information can be shared between which stakeholders, all of these things.
Yeah, but the challenge now, Joe, you are saying lack of partnership. So how can I talk about transparency and we are still talking about lack of partnership? So how can we move from there to the next level of transparency? Can you elaborate on that?
Well, see, now that's not easy to solve. Of course, if I could solve it, I would probably be a big government official. But one thing that I observe is that for us in the United States, of course, I'm now a resident outside the United States, but the biggest problem they had is that the government or the public sector does not have the mechanisms to classify information so that it can be managed in a open yet secure fashion with the private sector. So what happens is that for fear of leakage of critical information to adversaries or hostile third parties, they overclassify their information so that the in the end can't share it. And that's some of the procedural issues that we hope they're going to learn to overcome, because the information that the asset owners have is vital. Because, you know, again, depending on which country you're looking at, in general, most public sectors don't tend to really own and operate the bulk of the critical infrastructure, right? They're privatized in many places around the world. So the real threat information, the threat intelligence, the forensics, and everything that's associated with the cyber risks that we face is primarily owned by the private sector. So until we can figure out this base information exchange mechanism, which I think is one of the fundamental things that's lacking right now, it's going to be very hard to move the information from organizations that are primarily designed to protect national security and organizations that, let's be realistic, are primarily designed for profitability and safety and environmental responsibility and things like that.
Okay, I'll go to Dr. Sharhan now, but in my next question, I'll see how optimistic or pessimistic you are regarding that subject. Dr. Sharhan?
Well, I agree here, like, you know, there is like a huge conflict between, like, you know, the two parties in terms, like, you know, we have the private sector. The main objective is achieving a profitability, and the public sector needs to satisfy the requirements of the citizens and to preserve the national security. And with all these, like, you know, in order to satisfy or to create a healthy relationship, we need to establish a very solid infrastructure in terms of you know, centralizing the information, governing the information, who provides the access to. That's very, very critical. And I'm always trying to just, you know, give an example from Kuwait. And in Kuwait, for example, we have very sensitive data today handled by public sector, but, you know, there are an access to the private companies or private sector too. However, this access, for me, there is no governance system to regulate the relationship between the public sector, the owner of the information, and the private sector who are, you know, manipulating and working on this information.
But if I may interrupt you, Doctor, because that's your field, is the e-things, e-learning and e-governance. So with all those initiatives we have in the region, which started relatively late in comparison to the other parts of the world, like the e-government, and so you think that that's still, there is no regulatory body to...
You know, for example, I know that in the GCC countries we have some like regulators for the system, but in Kuwait, just recently they announced, you know, the regulator for the information systems. I don't know yet who is like, you know, on top of it, and what are the bylaws of the regulatory system here.
Because yesterday in his speech, the Minister of Oil, he mentioned, he highlighted on the legislation for cybersecurity. Yes,
that's true, because recently there is, like, you know, a decree, a mere decree, to establish the authority of the information in Kuwait.
Right.
But,
right.
You know, it's just, you know, and it's in fancy cases or stages. So we are looking further to have like a solid infrastructure to, you know, govern this relationship between the private and the public sector.
All right, thank you, Doctor. Joe, I'll start with you this time. So, Joe, what's the solution? I mean, how can we have better collaboration, better transparency, better partnership, better coordinations between all these different sectors? And by the way, when you talk about public or private, it's different from region to region.
Yes.
The perception of those concepts. But we are talking about governments, we are talking about different stakeholders. So regardless whether they were private or public, I'm talking about automation vendors, I'm talking about those governance bodies like standards, legislators, talking about oil companies, so these different stakeholders.
Well, the solution's obviously going to be complex no matter how you would slice that up. But one thing that I believe is not the answer, and that's to create more regulations. You have to consider that many of the companies that really are responsible for critical infrastructure and national critical infrastructure are multinational organizations as well. So if a company has operations that span multiple, you know, entities around the world, how do they manage their flow of threat information and vulnerability disclosures and handling of events without a coordinated effort from the public sector? So that's why the one thing that is really helping drive this forward is the creation of more local CERT organizations and the ability of the CERT organizations to share information amongst themselves, so that when a company in Canada suffers an attack, they're able to share the information in a well-structured and secure format to their CERT organization, who could then pass it on to CERT organizations in the GCC region or Africa or whatever. So I'm really a big supporter of the whole idea behind CERT, and hope that all countries will continue to stand them up, and in addition maintain the capability to deal with the unique challenges we face in the operational security side versus the standard information and network security.
Thank you, Joseph.
Okay. I will be sharing a success story, our own success story from Spain. We came back to 4 years ago, and you look in Google or Bing about the Spanish term for industrial cybersecurity, ciberseguridad industrial, you will be finding something like 4 results that are some articles I have written in the past. So I can see 2 different approaches here. One is top-down, with the government making some regulations, compliance. Sometimes comply stands for comply and lie. You know the problems with compliance. But the other is taking the ball and doing a bottom-up approach. And that's exactly what we did in the past in Spain. You know that I am the founder of the Industrial Cybersecurity Center. It's a non-profit organization completely dedicated to the promotion and engaging the different stakeholders about industrial cybersecurity in the Spanish-speaking world. So what we did was to analyze the different stakeholders, the market, and identify what